So, do you know what white privilege is, or have you ever heard of white privilege? Really?
Uh,
Kind of, maybe?
maybe, probably
Do
not.
you know what white privilege is?
Yes.
Could you explain?
Just the privilege that whites have in society over people of
Hey,
color.
do you know what white privilege is? What would you define white privilege as?
Are you looking for my definition of what I think it is, or like an academic definition of what white?
No, I mean just what do you think it is?
I would say
just give me
white privilege would probably be partially associated with the lack of discrimination by being associated with the majority opposed to the minority.
Right.
I would say a lot of white privilege would be the fact that you're generally regarded as raised in a more supportive and privileged environment.
Okay.
There's a lot less prejudice against you, I guess, because you're not part of a minority that typically has a lot of prejudice.
Do you think you get special treatment because of your skin color?
I could see in some cases where maybe racist people would treat me better.
I mean, do you think you benefit from white privilege in your everyday life?
Probably.
Yeah? Can you give me an example of what you think?
I think as long as I don't have an odd haircut, I think people generally look at me with a unbiased perspective. I think a lot of people who identify with other groups have a lot of people that look at them with bias, and before they even open their mouth, they are judged and put at a disadvantage.
Do you think that you run into this kind of things every day?
Probably. I mean, I don't get treated differently in class. I get, medical attention if I need it. I can ride any bus system. Can walk into any store. So I feel like, I probably get treated like that every day.
Okay. Do you think you're affected by this white privilege?
Positively, yes.
Okay. Do you have an example of like maybe a time that you've
I don't think I have any like direct, experience with it as far as, but I mean, I know that like in the workforce that white people definitely have, they'll definitely get like a job over, a person of color typically.
regardless of their experience or quality?
Yeah,
I mean, to some extent.
I mean, to some extent, because I'm sure it depends nowadays on the people, and people are evolving and becoming less racist. It seems, but there still are people out there that are very racist.
Right. Would you ever give up your white privilege? Like the only way to get rid of white privilege would be to give up your privilege, wouldn't it? Or is there any other way that you could kind of sear that the racism that happens in our society every day?
I think if Michael Jackson could be black and go white, I think white people could go black, right?
Yeah, but would you ever take a black pill if you could?
Oh, don't think so.
No?
Not unless you give me exceptional basketball skills, but I don't really like basketball, so that doesn't really matter. No, I have a very strong personal identity associated with who I was and where and how I was raised, and I think part of that is what you're referring to as white privilege, for better or worse, and I don't think I would walk away from that. That's part of my cultural background.
Would you ever give up your white privilege to end white privilege, or do you think there's another way to kind of rid the idea from our society?
No, I don't think I'd ever give it up, but I think there probably always will be some racism in society. It'll probably like decrease over time as society moves on, but there's always that very visual difference between people, and they'll always see that. And it's like even little kids, like in grocery stores, like, oh, why is that guy black, or that kind of thing. Because I mean, in the United States, we definitely are the majority.
Like, would you ever give up a scholarship maybe because they offered it to you and not a minority who applied?
I think if it directly affected me, if it was a friend who I knew was better qualified, but because of their ethnicity didn't receive it, I would give it up. Yes.
Okay.